Hello there, and welcome to Gooner U, where there are no degrees because the learning never stops. I'm Dove, a TA here at Gooner U, and my friend Keith is not here this week. He's on a very short sabbatical. We should see him next time. Joining me instead is a student of Gooner U, Israel Frankel, my father, no relation. This week, of course, featured round 4 of the Carabao Cup at London Stadium against West Ham, and Premier League match number 11 at St. James's Park against Newcastle. St. James's Park trips me up every time. So, Dad, how you doing?
Good. But before I say anything, well, first of all, I just wanted to get out of the way. I don't want to sit here beheaded the entire time, but at the same time, I didn't want everybody to think that I'm skimping and saving and spending all my money to my hockey paraphernalia. I'm just getting started with Arsenal, so this is my toe in the water. The next step will be to go full jersey, or in the hockey world, you would call it a sweater, even though it's not a real sweater, but that's what they call it. Okay. So now I'm in human mode. So before you go any further, I have to clarify this. Your mother is going to be sitting here watching this with me, and you have to clarify that not my father. You better clarify the not my father comment. Yes,
that's a reference
in every way, shape, form imaginable.
Oh boy, so she's in the room listening. That's interesting.
Sometimes she takes
okay. Well, anyways, yeah, no, that's a joke. You are my father and related. That is a joke. That is a reference to a show that you and I sometimes listen to, the Andrew Klavan Show. He refers to his son, who is also a podcaster, who has another show that I listen to. That is a bit that they do. Just like when I say there is no you and Gooner, that is another reference to his show. There's no Ian Klavan.
Being the lifelong Star Wars fan that you are, I'm surprised you didn't go for the "You Are My Father."
Well, you said Behatted, and you had me thinking something completely different, because that sounds very close to a much worse thing to be. So, beheaded rather than beheaded. So, first, I just wanted to, by way of introduction, just kind of tell the audience about, as far as I'm aware, your first experience with the sport of soccer, as we call it in the States. And my recollection of that was when I was probably around my son's age, around 7 or so, starting to play soccer. It was probably the U8 division. I think that's where I started. And I recall you being a referee, something I think we will talk about, an occupation we will be talking about a lot later in this episode.
Yeah.
But how did that happen? What was that like for you?
Well, when we first, brought you out there for soccer, and I started meeting people and everything else, and I volunteered to be a coach. And they said, well, geez, we got so many people that, that want to be coaches and that are already locked in as coaches. Have you ever thought about being an official? So, being the sports fan that I am, and not knowing the first thing about soccer rules, I figured that it eminently qualified me for that position. So they sent me to officiating school, and I became a referee.
Okay, wait. So how loosely do you mean sent you to officiating school? What was actually involved?
It was like a 2-hour class, I think, or something.
Oh, okay. So there actually was a classroom involved. I was imagining they just gave you a rule book and said, "Good luck."
No, but the irony is, so they had me out there. I was officiating my own games, but it was all kindergartners, right?
So you weren't officiating my division, because I was older than kindergarten.
They took the more experienced, knowledgeable referees for that league. I was a newbie.
Oh, okay. So for refereeing the kindergarten games, it was a 2-hour class showing you how to tie shoelaces. Is that what it was?
Well, you were getting to what my primary responsibility was. That's right. No, I mean, they did a serious job of it. I mean, the obvious intention was that this is your starting point.
Right.
As the kids moved up, you would move up as well, and that was the intention.
Right.
But in reality, I did find that I spent almost all of my time watching the kids' feet, and any time that I saw an untied shoelace, I would blow my whistle, I would stop, I would sit down, I would tie the kid's shoelace, and then we would we would move on. And I blew that whistle a lot of times. I can't even recall if I, how many. I want to say how many, but I feel like saying if I actually called any penalties.
Well, yeah, I mean, no, certainly no penalties, probably fouls, but that's interesting to me because in our league U6, there were no referees, there were no games involving two teams. We would have at most one scrimmage each session, and it was just our own team playing against each other. So it's interesting that they even tried having that level of play for that young of a crowd. That's surprising to me, but. Yeah, cool. So before we move on to the topics at hand, I do have some follow-up from last week. First of all, we'd been talking about the St. George's Cross, which is what England uses as their flag, and we'd been talking about it relative to the Sevilla match. We were seeing red and white flags in the stands. I had mentioned, and I think Keith agreed just out of politeness, but I had mentioned that it's in the Sevilla flag too, and I think what he was probably thinking of, and what I know I was thinking of, was the Barcelona flag has the St. George's Cross as one visual element in it. Sevilla's flag does have red and white vertical bars, similar to what you see in their jerseys sometimes. So that's one correction. Also, something I noticed was we've talked before about the byline ads where, for you and for our audience, the goal line is at either end of the field in front of the goal between the posts. The byline is between the posts and the corners, right? So goal line in the middle, byline beyond that, right? So certain competitions have byline ads. The Premier League does not do that, but we notice it in cup competitions, and I think maybe the Champions League might. And we've talked about whether those are imposed digitally, like superimposed over the feed digitally, or I've seen in the past sometimes that they're painted on, and I've noticed in some competitions they don't look sharp, like they're superimposed digitally but not done as well, versus MLS has them, and it seems like Apple does a good job with it. I definitely noticed the West Ham match had them. They were definitely painted on because you could see when they were showing certain alternative camera angles through VAR or replays, you could see that the perspective was off and that it was showing it like painted on the ground. And you could kind of see some wrinkles too. It's kind of funny if you're paying attention to it. So let's talk. So I tasked you, knowing that you would be filling in this week. I had asked you to kind of pay attention to the last week or so of matches, and I think you maybe even did last week as well, some of the matches that we covered already, but just kind of jotting down thoughts and things that you wanted to talk about as someone who has been watching about as long as I have at this point, maybe a little bit less, but not as attentively, just as a more casual observer. So things that you were wondering about, especially with your experience with other sports that I don't have. You've always watched other sports way more than myself, whereas as an adult I never really watched anything at all until I started watching soccer with season 1 of Gooner U. So what do you think is the first thing that you might want to talk about?
Yeah, okay. Thank you. One of the questions that I have I've watched most of the games. Any games that I haven't been able to watch the whole game, I've been going through the extended replays. I've liked, because it's kind of a mix between just the shortest relays and watching the whole game. So if you want to be generous, and call it. But yeah. So what about? So I've got a bunch of questions here, and thanks for the opportunity to go through them. What about player loaning? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What is it? And how does it work? Why would you do it? And my impression is to compare it to the sports that I've always followed, primarily hockey and football, basketball during the Michael Jordan years, being from Chicago originally and living there at the time.
Those Michael Jordan years are amongst the professional sports I did watch in my life.
That's right. Yeah. I was never a basketball fan really before or afterward, but boy, during the Michael Jordan years, I never missed a game.
Yeah.
Wow, is that something? Feel very fortunate to have had experience. But I guess it seems to me that, like, when you're loaning a player, the only analogy that I have, it seems like sending when American sports team sends the player to their minor league franchise, something like that. Is that a fair analogy?
It might be the closest thing you can find in other sports, but and I think this is kind of a common refrain among some of the other questions that you showed me that you had on your mind. Soccer is played so much more broadly than every other sport that we play in America, where there are so many thousands and thousands of teams. It's like unfathomable to someone who is a fan of like baseball or hockey or something, although there was a notable hockey news item that covered the English Hockey League, which I didn't know existed. There's an unfortunate fatality this week. Did you hear about that? Like, I didn't know that there was English hockey before hearing about that. But yeah, that was unfortunate. But anyways, so soccer is played all over the place at all different levels all over the world, right? So it solves two problems. So first of all, you've got some teams that maybe can't afford to pay the full salary to hire a really good player. On the other hand, you have higher performing teams like Arsenal, right? Where you have a bench populated with players who are realistically never going to see any game time in one of your matches, right? So take Odegaard.
So are these players? Sorry to interrupt you, but would these be players that, like, because they haven't matured yet, or you have them there in case of injury?
So maturation is one of the biggest aspects of this. So if we're to talk about Odegaard, we had loaned Odegaard to a Spanish team. I want to say Real Madrid, possibly. We had loaned him to a foreign club before I started watching Arsenal. He had come back already by, last season when I was watching. And I think he'd already been back for at least a couple years at that point. But when he was an even more junior player, he wasn't ready to play for us. He was not going to see any game time. We lent him out someplace. We collect a little bit of money for giving them that privilege, right? He's able to go there, develop his skills because he's actually playing in matches that matter, right? He gets better, and then we bring him back in. He's got more confidence. He's a better player. We've appreciated his value. And in the case of Odegaard, we kept him, and he's one of our best players now, right?
Well, but let me ask you a question. So that when you loan a player out, you say they give you a little bit of money. Now, does that money cover the salary that you're paying for that player during that period of time?
I don't know. That's something that we can follow up on next week. Perhaps I can ask Keith, get his take on that. I can do some research, but so that kind of dovetails with some other things that you were wondering about as far as how do transfers work, right?
Yeah.
But to finish out the thread of loans, so you're developing a player. You may keep him after the loan is up, or having gained value for that player, you can then later on sell him to another club and get even more money because he's more valuable because he has improved at that point, right? Okay. We've had recent examples of both. I'm pretty sure that's what happened with Austin Trusty. He was a player who we had who never played a match that mattered for Arsenal, but we'd loaned him out. He played a bunch in another club, and now we just sold him for more than we would have been able to sell him for had we never loaned him out. So
very interesting.
So yeah, I don't think there's any analog to that in American sports. I just don't think that's done.
Now, is this something that's done just in the Premier League, or is it done?
No.
Professional?
No, and I think that's the overarching difference of soccer compared to franchise sports in the US is the model is just totally different. Each club is an entity operating as a business. Each player is a free agent, right? Versus American sports where it's a closed system, right? When you're wondering about transfers, right? You had been asking like some questions about transfers, right? What were you wondering there?
let's see. I'll find my question here.
Like you were asking if trades happen, I think, right?
Yeah, I mean, trying to make the analogy. Do they actually trade players, or is it always like a transfer, like a one-way?
Right. As far as I know, it's always going to be one way because there's no reason to trade, right? When you're in the NFL, the NHL, the NBA, you take one player from another team, like it's a zero-sum game. He's almost got to play someplace else, right? He's got to replace somebody on your roster. And if there's an open spot where you just took another player out, you're going to put him into that spot. Like trades make sense in a closed system. In an open system like this, no, it's down to your balance sheet. How much can you afford? You get rid of players who you can't afford to free up funds to bring in players who you want, right? And it's operated like a business in that way. And so I'll have a link in the show notes in the show description. This is a video that Keith shared some weeks ago. It's from Gunner Blog. It's like a 20-minute YouTube video going into the nitty-gritty details of how transfers actually happen in the Premier League. And it's from an Arsenal perspective. He's an Arsenal supporter. So that'll get into all the details, but basically there are fees paid to the club for them to release the player, as well as you directly transacting with the player and buying out, giving them a new contract. And they need to want it, right? Like the player needs to want to transfer. The club needs to allow the transfer. But that's it. Like beyond that, the league doesn't really have any say. As long as it's during one of the transfer windows, yeah, that would be okay. So,
all right, cool. Okay, now here's one for you. Do they ever cancel, or it seems like almost lately, the last several weeks or so, at least, it's like every single game when they come down and they show a close up on the sidelines or players, it's pouring rain, right?
Yeah.
Do they ever cancel or delay a game?
So I had to do some research on this because I have not seen a Premier League match delayed or canceled in the time that I've been watching. So I didn't have an offhand answer. I did some research. There will be, I think, two different links that I gave. There are two different links. One comes from premierleague.com, and it's actually informed by representative of the PGMOL. That's the officials organization for English soccer. The second one is from The Athletic, which I know is a source that Keith is fond of sharing from. And so the short answer is that it's up to the hosting club, whoever runs the stadium, in concert with the official, right? So the official makes the ultimate call, and the stadium is going to maybe bring the official in within 48 hours of the match and say, hey, we think there might be an issue here. You might want to take a look. And the types of things that they cite. So Keith and I noticed a couple months ago, there was some match that Arsenal played where not only was it raining, it was a thunderstorm. There was lightning. Like it was severe enough weather that we were surprised, and we noted on air that it was surprising they were actually playing in that match. But beyond that, like what we've seen so far this season, it's been raining almost every game. And I get the feeling that that's not entirely uncommon in England. But lots of rain, and you definitely play through in the rain. Now, if the field is so flooded that the referee feels players' safety is in danger, that's one of the criteria. So he needs to be able to guarantee players' safety, that the playing conditions allow the players to be safe. He also needs to guarantee the spectacle for the fans was the other major consideration, right? So in that regard, for instance, rain, you expect there to be rain, but if they're not able to make it there because weather events are preventing traffic flow into the area is one thing. If there's severe winds that could affect public transit or things like that. It was really strong wind. They mentioned snow, but I get the feeling snow is a little more rare. It just doesn't happen as much. They're talking about a match where there was a blizzard that rapidly came in, and even then they played through the blizzard until visibility was so low that players were running into each other, right? So, there goes that. I need to remember to go like this instead of this because I get the thumbs up that comes up on the Mac. So, players couldn't see each other and were running into each other because the snow was coming down so heavily. B, the fans couldn't see the action, so the spectacle wasn't there anymore because they couldn't actually see the players playing anymore.
Right.
So that was a match that I guess they were already playing. So I don't know at that point if they had to cancel it and reschedule or if they waited for the weather to pass. I don't know what they ended up doing.
You don't think they would just keep the clock running and when they resume a few days later, they would just have
24 hours stoppage time? Yeah, that seems more consistent. So yeah, no, it's an interesting question, but it seems like it really does not happen that much. I mean, the articles that I found were from like 2020 and 2021, and we're only able to cite a handful of examples from recent memory where there had been postponements or cancellations. So it seems like it doesn't happen that much, and it needs to be pretty extreme for them to do so. So why don't we move on?
I have one more question before we move on. I have one more question, and I have to ask this because this is not my question. This is a question that was given to me. This is from I think you know him. His name is Israel Frankel, and the question is, what if the keeper gets a red card? Which I thought was a great question.
Yeah. It is. So that was something that he asked for the 2 minutes or so that we were watching, me, you, and him watching together a week or two ago.
And by the way, for the folks at home who aren't related to us, this is my grandson Dove's son.
Yeah. So. That was a good question. It's something he's thinking about because he wants to be a professional goalkeeper. That is still his stated aspiration. So we'll see how that goes. I'm encouraging him in that regard and helping wherever I can. So I had a hunch what would happen, and I did some research to confirm what I believe would happen in that case. But basically, when you get a red card, you're out of the rest of the match. And unlike when there is punitive action taken in most other sports, you don't get a substitution, right? You play short-sided for the rest of that match, right? So it's 10v11 instead of 11v11. Now, if you have a forward that's given a red card, you change your formation, a midfielder, a defender. You lose any of the on-field players, you change your formation up and you're fine, right? Now, if a goalkeeper is out, you need to do something, right? So what you would typically do is you would then have to substitute one of the other players to bring your second string keeper in at that point, right? So you'd give up a forward, most likely, to be able to bring in a secondary keeper to take his place. So,
and I won't. I'm resisting the temptation to ask, what if the second goalkeeper gets a red card?
That might be the first time it ever happened. I think, but
keep in mind, you go back in the history of hockey. Okay, back, let's say, past the into the 60s, I think, and beyond. 50s and 40s. Back in those days, in the NHL, they did not have a spare goaltender sitting on the bench.
Mm.
And so if a goaltender did get injured and put out of the game, there's stories. There's a lot. You read the history of hockey, they tell the stories of combing the bars looking for the backup goalkeeper to come in and finish the game.
Yeah, things have gotten a lot more formalized in the days since then, in hockey as well as soccer. So let's move on to the West Ham match. So this was Carabao Cup Round 4. This match happened November 1st of this past week. Shortly after we recorded, I think it may have been the same day earlier in the day that we ended up releasing. And West Ham ended up coming out ahead 3-1. So we were eliminated from the Carabao Cup. This is the second year in a row that I've seen us get eliminated. Well, the first year I've seen us get eliminated. The second year that we got eliminated, of course, as we've lamented, nobody saw Arsenal get eliminated last year, so we still can deny that it even happened. That match was televised nowhere. But this one, unfortunately, I had spoiled for me a little bit at a time. So at first, the day of the match, I was preparing to perhaps maybe watch at least some of it on the train ride to or from work. So I opened up ESPN Plus to see if I could download the replay, because cell service is spotty. I don't rely on streaming things while I'm in transit. I usually download it to watch offline.
Just to clarify, when you say in transit, you're on a train.
Yeah, on the train, of course. So, I thought I said that. So I was in the ESPN Plus app, and once I tapped on the Carabao Cup division, off on the right side of my screen, they were showing a table of the current day's matches that had finished and what the scores were. Now, I recognized that quickly enough to stick my hand up over it and block it from view, right?
Right.
What I'd seen at that point was that West Ham's name was bold. Now, I didn't know what that meant, and so I was able to convince myself I still didn't know how the game ended, that it could have been, maybe it was just because they were the home team, that they bold the home team's names. I didn't know, right? In hindsight, yes, they must bold the name of the victor, right? So then time went on. Later on, I was editing the show. I think this is the next day, probably. I was editing the show and getting ready to post it. And I was on Twitter getting ready to prepare my draft of the tweet that I send out announcing the new episode of Gooner U, when Twitter made me log in again. And so instead of being on my page where I only see my own tweets, I was on my homepage and I saw a bunch of Arsenal away kit photos. And of course, my eye was drawn to it, and I saw West Ham 3-1 Arsenal, right? I was like, so then the final score was eventually ruined for me. I haven't given up trying to stay spoiler free, but it's getting there.
You tell me that as the seconds closed down in the second half, you weren't sure that maybe that wasn't the mistake and it was 3-0, right?
Yeah, right. I know. So yeah, I mean, I think I had possibly even, there might have been another step in the middle there where I saw a headline like Arsenal eliminated from Carabao Cup or something like that. So I think I spent some of the day Thursday knowing that they lost, but not knowing the final score before the final nail in the spoiler coffin was in. But what I will say about being spoiled on this match, knowing Arsenal was eliminated, knowing they lost 3-1, I was able to enjoy the game in a different way, like in a more analytical way, trying to see what led to it. What could they have done differently? What weren't they doing that they needed to in order to win? So I was able to wear a different hat as I watched the game.
There is no try. There is no fail.
Close. I'll accept the paraphrase reference.
the Yoda reference.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I don't know ultimately how much there really is to say about this match. I mean, it was rough. We clearly didn't put our best effort into winning it. We had a respectable side, but we did not put our A team on. Our first squad was not on.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that. How upset can you get about a game when you're not putting your best effort out there? And I think you almost have to look at it from the team's perspective. If you're Arteta and the people who make the decisions and all that out there, it's like you're not. Yeah, you want to win, but I think ultimately you almost think that they're judging it by a different scale. How well did you play?
No, I don't think it's a matter of how they're judging the match. It's really just that, and I got this sense too from just talking to, a friend of the show, Mike, who's guest hosted a couple times. The Carabao Cup just doesn't matter. Like it's just a second tier competition that we don't care if we lose, right? Keith has mentioned before, it's something that is very often treated as a youth competition. Arsenal doesn't quite treat it as that, but that's part of why we would put our second team on. In a way, it might be like last season where we're relieved to be eliminated. It's less strain on our roster, on the depth of our bench, right? Where in January, we're going to have the FA Cup coming up. We're going to be in the Champions League, hopefully for a while longer. Like, the Champions League matters to us. Our standings in the Premier League matters to us. The FA Cup, I do believe, matters to us. But the FA Cup probably matters less than the Champions League does to us. And I think you'll probably see that reflected in the roster too. So
yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And what do we mean by strain? Yeah, it's wear and tear on the players, but at the same time, these days we're going through some injuries too. So I think that's important too. Give these guys who are hurt a chance to heal and cut and reduce possibility of incurring some more injuries where it's going to hurt us, where we really care about it.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know. Was there anything else that you really wanted to talk about? Like, I just feel like overall, it doesn't matter.
What can you tell me? Can you tell me what in the world? I know how it turned out, but what was White trying? It's funny, in preparing for the show here, I went back. I watched the game live, right? And in preparing for the show, I went back and watched some of the highlights, and I wanted to see those replays of the first goal where Ben White got the own goal. Okay, I love that. I love that term, by the way. I love that term. Other sports should look at it the way that international football does. And I went back and I must have seen the replay, and I went back and I saw the replay in context, and I went back and I manually moved it back a few times. And for the life of me, it looks like he's going in that direction.
Yeah. Yeah, so you're right. That is the one thing we definitely should talk about from this match. I put it out of my mind already because I still can't believe it. But yeah, I think the charitable explanation is he got disoriented. He lost his place. He thought he was heading it away from the goal, and it was in the goal, because that was clearly not an accident. The ball went in the direction that he wanted to. He wanted it to, right? Like, that was an intentional action. It wasn't like he got caught off guard. He headed it intentionally. It went in the direction his head indicated it should go, which was toward the goal, right? The less charitable explanation, I'm not trying to levy any sort of accusation, but if it's not that, he's on the take. Like, there, and I don't think that's the case. I don't want to say that about him. I don't think it is. But that's the only other explanation I could possibly think of, is he had money riding on the game against Arsenal or something. Like, that's the only other thing I can think of. But let's be nice and let's assume that it was just he got disoriented in the chaos in the box, like we talk about.
Well, I disagree with your theory. I don't think he was paid off. But if you're going to open up that door, I didn't recognize him in the Newcastle match, and at first I couldn't. They called his name. I said, "That's not him." And then I looked at the color of his hair. So that would kind of feed any conspiracy theories that you're trying to play out there. Well, gee, what is he in hiding after what happened in the Newcastle match, which I know we haven't got to, but we'll get to.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, his hair now is different. I mean, and not just subtly. I'm not the kind of person that's looking at somebody's hairstyle, right? But he has this bright white.
Yeah. It didn't last for long. Yeah, he had that, as it turns out, for maybe 3-4 matches or something. He had it for a couple of weeks and decided against it. I did not do research to find out what he may have had to say on the matter. Probably nothing, but
yeah. And then when I see him in the Newcastle, I said, okay, yeah, he's going into hiding. He's hoping nobody recognizes him.
so yeah. It was a disappointment, but not a big one. It was a fairly minor disappointment. I mean, it was interesting that even once we were down 3-0 that Arteta threw out, because we were down 3-0 in the 60th minute. Like, there was still a lot to play at that point. He did bring on Martinelli, Saka, Odegaard. I do question what he was trying to achieve at that point. Like, did he think it was likely that we'd be able to draw even? And if not, closing the goal difference doesn't matter when it's a competition we're about to be eliminated from. So he must have felt that we could have drawn even, but that was interesting.
Yeah, that was a question that I had too. I mean, it just didn't make sense. I mean, yeah, do you think you can turn the game around in that short a period of time?
Well, it was 30 minutes. So if you average one goal every 10 minutes, that's a lot, but it's not impossible, right? Like, Martinelli was brought on in the 66th minute, right? It's like 25 minutes left. So, maybe eight and a half minutes.
And then Odegaard.
Odegaard was later. And Odegaard, I think, was the one who scored that last goal at the end.
Yep.
So, yeah, for what it's worth, we at least didn't let them continue their streak of clean sheets at home, I guess. The commentators made mention of some kind of streak they had going or something with clean sheets. So we put an end to that. So that's something, I guess.
Yeah, I guess my take on it, it's like Arsenal. I don't think Arsenal played all that badly, right? And
well, what I would say, my overall take on the match is Ben White screwed the pooch. Like, I think if that hadn't happened in that way that early on, also, I mean, that was the 16th minute, right? That was very early on. And I think that just set us back so early on in a way that really affected the rest of the match. The whole rest of the first half, they didn't have a single shot, period. On goal, off goal, like on target, off target. They didn't have a single shot. That was the only point that was scored for West Ham, or could have been scored for West Ham, was that own goal. Now, to their credit, they did come out swinging in the second half. They didn't just sit back and hold on to that one goal the entire match. They did come out with a much stronger effort that resulted in the next two. So I do wonder if the locker room would have been less demoralized even if we'd drawn 0-0 at the half mark or something. I imagine that things could have gone very differently if it hadn't been for Ben White. But who knows?
I loved the show. The different videos, different documentaries about Arsenal. Like what's that one that was on Amazon Prime?
The All or Nothing.
All or Nothing, and then there was like one or two others. I would have loved to have seen that locker room when Ben White walked in there in between halves. Yeah,
I would not have wanted to be him. Yeah.
I think that would have been worth seeing.
Yeah. All right. Well, before we get to the Newcastle match, I would like to thank our sponsor for this episode, Zencastr. So we use Zencastr for every episode. We're using it right now. We just open it up in Chrome. This episode, my dad does. This is his first time. No big deal. Just choose your audio and video sources. If you have multiple cameras like I do, I have to choose the camera every time. And we click record, and that's it. We're going. It records locally, and it uploads it when you're all done and as you're recording. So that way you get the best possible quality that you can. So it's super easy to record a podcast with Zencastr. You just log in to your web browser, click the start recording button, and that's it. You record a high quality podcast right away. You can record studio quality sound and up to 4K video with your guests. Feel a sense of zen knowing Zencastr's multi-layered backups ensure you always have your recordings in the highest quality, even if the connection is unstable. That's one thing that's really cool. You never need to worry about, even if the video is laggy and glitchy, it's all recorded locally. So even if things don't look good, you know that it's going to be good once it's all done. So that's peace of mind. It's also an all-in-one solution. So if you've thought about podcasting before and you realize that you need a lot of different tools and services, well, those days are over. With Zencastr's all-in-one podcasting platform, you can create your podcast all in one place and then distribute to Spotify, Apple, and other major destinations. There's also a new iPhone app, so it's easier than ever to record now. With the iPhone app from Zencastr, you can take your podcast on the road. If that sounds good to you and you want to start your passion project, go to zencastr.com/pricing and use our code Gooner, and you'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencastr paid plan. I want you to have the same easy experience as we do for all our podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story. So again, go to zencastr.com/pricing and use our code Gooner at checkout. Again, there is no U in Gooner. There will be a link in the show notes and description if you want to take advantage. All right. Do you have any final thoughts on the match? I realized I may have jumped the gun a little bit there, but
no, I think that I pretty much, obviously I think I agree with you. I mean, I'll tell you that second goal by West Ham was just beautiful. Beautiful pass, beautiful reception and shot. Just a beautiful, beautiful goal. And I guess I wasn't really crazy about that third goal that they scored on us. He only hit it with one hand. Now, you're a keeper, Dolph. What's your take on that? Do you think that was a savable shot?
Well, it was difficult. If you look at the replay on that, it deflected off of Kivior. So whenever there's a deflection involved, right? So a lot of what a goalkeeper is doing is you're studying the situation, you're anticipating, we call it reading, right? You're reading the situation. You have a read of the player who's kicking the ball based on body language, ball position, all that stuff, right? You're figuring out based on this moment in time, if his foot strikes the ball, where is it going to go? And you're anticipating it. You're moving in that direction. You're getting ready for it. And as soon as there's a deflection, all that is thrown off the window. You can't anticipate deflections like that, especially the nearer it is to the ball. It sends it in a wildly different and unpredictable direction. So the fact that he got a hand on it, it's good reflexes, right? And keepers need to have good reflexes too. But I don't think there's much more he could have done. I mean, and ultimately, it was the third goal. I don't think he's losing any sleep over that one. But, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess, I guess just in summary, Arsenal didn't play that badly, but just not well enough.
Yeah.
I think it's a shame that they didn't win it, but they didn't have to. So, okay, now we have full focus on what we, in the scheme of things, is actually more important.
Oh yeah. So I think you had some questions about the match noted, right?
Well, let's see. I have one here, and this is something that I've wondered about ever since I've started watching, and I haven't asked you about. What's the deal with the kids? This was asked by Deborah Frankel, who I think if we can connect the dots, she's my wife. I think everybody else can connect the rest of those dots.
Hi, Mom.
Who are those kids who walk out with the players in the beginning? What's the deal?
Yeah, so this is something we've talked about before. They're referred to as mascots, and they are kids who are in the communities around the clubs, maybe related to one of the players or staff of the clubs. And it's cute, and it's a way to get kids into the sport, get them engaged in it and interested, and it's cute. Why walk alone when you can walk with a cute little kid holding your hand instead? As we mentioned a couple weeks back, one club was instead they substituted instead of human mascots, they had dogs that they were trying to throw attention to a local animal shelter or something, saying adopt a pet, So yeah, it's
You say why walk alone? Isn't that one of the Arsenal songs? You'll never walk alone. Isn't that
no right? Liverpool.
Sorry. I knew that it came into my brain through watching
Jerry and the Pacemakers. You'll never walk alone. Yeah. Right. Close.
I would love to know. I'm sure the sources are out there, and I probably just haven't gotten to the point of digging, into them. But the things that they chant and they sing and everything in the stands, it's like a whole different fan culture. out there, you know?
Oh yeah. And you're seeing with the Champions League, every country has their own soccer culture. Like, we are getting exposed to a lot of English fan culture. When I watch Messi play, I'm seeing Miami fan culture and American fan culture for soccer, which fan culture for soccer is a little bit different than other American sports, but probably closer to American sports than English football fans. But yeah, no, it's every country has their own flavor.
Yeah, if you want to see American fan culture, just put on the other team's uniform and go into their home stadium to watch a game. We're not sitting in these reserve sections,
right,
with thousands and thousands of other like-minded fans,
right.
And it always, the experiences that I've had with that in this country, and in I don't know, New Jersey and Madison Square Garden and some other places, it's a credit. It's a credit to the American fan. What that experience is like, and you have to experience it. If you're a fan for a team, go on an away game, put on your stuff, and go out and sit in the stands. And
oh yeah, we don't have the culture of hooliganism here that the UK does. I think it's a safety concern more than a heckling concern that they separate the fans of different teams. But yeah. So let's move on to Newcastle. So this is a match that did matter. So the loss matters more. So when I was picking jerseys to wear today, I had to pick between two losing jerseys for this week. And I picked the one for the match that stung less. We were wearing the green against Newcastle. Or no, we were wearing home. We were wearing home against Newcastle. So
it's too bad I don't have a traditional referee's uniform. I would put that on to do an homage to Newcastle.
Yeah, right. So this is our 11th Premier League match and our first loss of the season, and only our third loss in all competitions. We basically had one loss in each competition: the eliminating loss in the Carabao Cup, and then we had the loss against Law in the Champions League, and that was our first Premier League loss. This one felt like it shouldn't have been the case. This feels like we're in an alternate reality that conspired against Arsenal on this one. Like, I think Arsenal played better than the score shows, and I could see this match being a scoreless draw. I think that goal that was given should not have been. I think that is the key takeaway from this match.
Yeah, if I were a conspiracy-minded person, I mean, I look at the way that those Newcastle players were pushing around the entire game, the Arsenal players. I look at how few yellow flags were thrown, how few penalties were called. Here, they had that one spate of three of them. That was when they were all arguing with the official. It's almost like it was, hey, I got things under control. You shut up and let me take care of it, right?
Yeah.
And then the goal.
Yeah. Well, one thing I'll say, it was actually interesting. So I was listening to a podcast last night. So here I was in the garage preparing baseball gloves. So our baseball season just ended, and I had 3 catcher's gloves that are way too stiff for these kids to actually use. So I'm like trying to condition them and break them in a little bit. So I'm sitting there doing this and listening to a podcast, and he keeps on going to sports analogies. I was listening to a speech given by a U.S. judge to a bunch of other judges. And he's talking about Supreme Court decisions and things like that. And he was talking about this study that was done in which they had officials officiate matches, I think based on videos or something. And basically, do you call a foul here? Do you not call it? One had sound, one group had sound. The other group had no sound. The group that heard the fans called more favorably in favor of the home team. This whole study basically substantiated the home field advantage in a scientific way and explained it by virtue of the pressure put on the officials by the fans in the stadium. He also brought COVID era gameplay in as supporting evidence, because these were a whole bunch of professional matches played without any fans allowed in the stands. And he said you saw the same types of things where the calls were much more even. If you just look at calls for and against the home team, that it was much more even than the average would indicate. And it's a real thing, apparently. This is a measurable thing. It's something you can aspire to overcome, but it is a very real force against officials. And, he was talking about pressure being put on justices in the context that I was listening to it. But it was interesting because it actually was something from sports that got brought up on a non-sports show.
Yeah, I had never heard that before. It's fascinating. I would love to see some further studies. If they could come up with some really comprehensive studies to come up with some really solid results, it would be interesting to present these to, or maybe have involved in the research process. Different sports, it could be across all sports, across all countries.
It is. It is. This is a general thing. And so, and they talk about playing the official, like, in a way, right? Like that's one of the jobs of a supporting fan, is boo as loudly as you can. You want your team to get all the calls in their favor. Boo every call against your team. And it has some measurable psychological effect on the officials. And that, I don't know if that goes all the way to explaining the officiation of this match, but they did show that Newcastle has a very strong record at home. And we've talked on this show in the past about certain stadiums are harder to win at for Arsenal and for others. And that's at least a factor. It's something interesting to think about. But, when you look at that goal and the 3 separate VAR reviews, the one with the ball, they never showed us the angle that definitively shows the ball didn't go out of bounds.
The overhead.
They showed us They showed us the one that was from further infield that made it look like it was out. But then the commentators said, "Now keep in mind there could be an overhang, and just because you see green doesn't mean that there isn't an overhang." And
just as he was saying that, the replay that was on the screen, just when he was saying those exact words, Stove, the replay went about 1 second or 2 back and pushed the ball just a little bit.
Well, but okay, so hold on. This is something you may not be aware of. When VAR is in progress, we're seeing what the video referee, or if it's gone to the on-field official, whichever official is looking at the video, we're seeing a live feed of what they're seeing. So that means the official was trying to move it forward or backward and see how the ball moved. Okay. That wasn't the broadcast team. That was the official who was doing that.
Okay, good.
So
I'm glad.
So the commentary would have no bearing. It was maybe a funny coincidence, but it wasn't the broadcast team. It wasn't a coordinated effort, let's say. But so they never showed us a down the line view that, to the fans watching this at home, at least, would have made it clear that yes, it was actually in. See, you can see what the VAR saw. It looked like it was a judgment call that they possibly got wrong. And then on top of it, you had the foul. Like, I'm trying to remember what all 3 of them were. There was a potential out of bounds. There was the potential foul. Oh, and then there's the offsides check too. Now, the offside check that came in between, they had said something like, well, they couldn't rule it offsides because the view was obstructed. So, hold on. Did you, you're muted.
Yeah, the view was obstructed by the guy that was being pushed over.
I don't think so. The push was after the potentially offside pass. So it was the pass that led to Gabriel getting knocked over. But
okay, well, it seemed like in the replay. It seemed like watching the replay, though, it was like first they questioned the push, then they were questioning the offsides, and
I recalled the offside happening second. It doesn't matter which order they reviewed it, but yeah. So when you're reviewing offside, what they're trying to do is they're trying to find the instant that the ball is struck to move it forward. And they're trying to see at that instant, was the player who would contribute to the play, so typically the player who's going to receive the ball, but potentially a supporting player, was he in an offside position? So what's I guess the player was knocking Gabriel over. I guess maybe by that metric, maybe he was contributing enough to the play where him being in an offside position would matter as he was knocking down Gabriel. I'm not sure, but I don't know how you get away with not calling that a foul, which would have led to a penalty and therefore completely changed the result of the match potentially. I don't know how, like, it would have turned it from a goal for them to a goal for us. Like at least left it as a draw. If that had been called a penalty, that was just, I don't know how they got to that not being a foul.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you completely. Yeah, it may or may not have been out of bounds, and yeah, it may or may not have been offside. But I don't know how many times I watched that replay. He was pushing him. He pushed him. To me, that's as cut and dried, as clear as you could ask for. He actually pushed him over.
Yeah.
And you're not supposed to be able to do that, right?
Well, everything's subjective, right? Like, the referees are afforded a lot of power to decide what you are and are not able to do. And I'm sure they do have objective standards that they're supposed to adhere to, but there's so much interpretation involved, and I don't have internalized every last standard that they're supposed to be holding them to. But yeah, it seems like, especially when he was the defender who would have been able to block that opportunity, like if he hadn't been knocked over, he would have been able to clear that ball that ended up getting knocked into the goal. Knocking him over when he didn't even have the ball, that seems like that should have been a foul. Yeah.
I happened to see a clip of the post-game interview with Arteta.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, I've never seen him like that.
Oh yeah, fired up.
Well, here, quote, clear and obvious decisions. The officials missed clear and obvious. I wrote it down and quoted it because I don't want to get it wrong. The officials missed clear and obvious decisions, and he further characterized the call on the goal as a disgrace.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for him to say that, I think that says a lot.
Yeah. So I don't really have much else to say about this match. I mean,
what's the statement apart from that? How did you enjoy the play, Mrs. Lincoln?
Right. Yeah, it was. The officiation decided this result, as far as I'm concerned. It was pretty disgraceful.
I hope Keith is watching this so he notices my Civil War reference that I got it. I'm a huge Civil War buff.
So all right. Do you have any questions about this match that you wanted to talk about?
Well, let's see. Yeah, one thing that I see quite a bit, and I know that you've mentioned this when we've watched the games together, is could you lay out what's the situation? Okay, you're the goalkeeper, you're in the net, and there's a let's say I don't know if with the guys that you play with, I don't know if that would be a corner kick or it might be a kick from closer in. I've never seen you all play. I was hoping to get out to New York for it this year, but just didn't work out. Next year for sure. But what about the whole cross? Because I know you've mentioned that to me when we've talked.
So you're asking what is a cross?
Well, what is it? What's the significance of it from an offensive perspective? From a defensive perspective, from the keeper's perspective?
Well, yeah. So a cross is a pass from away from the goal, like toward the touch lines, that crosses the field in the direction of, parallel to the front of the goal, right? So crosses in front of the goal in a way that an assisting player can then get it in. So it's a very common form of assist in soccer. So you cross so that someone else can either take a 1-touch shot or a 2-touch shot, get the ball and get it in. And what it allows you to do is there's usually the most pressure around the player. Most of the attention is on the player that has the ball, right? So take the player who has the ball, move it far away into someone who's snuck into a dangerous position, and they're able to get it in. They may not have as much pressure on them, right? What I think you might be talking about is from a corner kick, you have an elevated pass, right? So you very often have the ball kicked way up in the air. So you might have an aerial cross. I don't know if that's a term of art, but it's an airborne cross that is very often headed to, or attempted to be headed toward the goal. And there I said beheaded now. So
headed toward the goal. That's a nice play on words.
So what we were talking about is I was pointing out there was at least one, maybe a couple instances during this match of Raya catching a cross, like we've talked about, where the ball will be in the air, and before the other team has the chance to head it toward the goal, Raya is able to get his hands on it and completely preclude the possibility of it going in. Right.
He busts up the play, and that's I know that's something that you've mentioned to me that you thought was one of Raya's real fortes, one of his real
Oh, yeah. And once it was pointed out to me, I see him do it routinely during every match. And it's a superpower. It's something that I don't see other keepers doing. And it shuts down an avenue of scoring that every club makes use of. So it's a good thing. I think you had a question about catching crosses, right?
Well, let's see. Yeah. I mean, how dangerous. So within that context, now that you've set it all up, why are some keepers better at it than others? Is it dangerous for the keeper to try to catch the cross? Maybe there's keepers who don't even try it at all because of danger.
So when the ball is in the air, it's very tricky time. So let's say from the perspective of an offensive player heading the ball in, right? The toughest thing is jumping at the right time from the right position to be able to head the ball where you want to, right? Like you've talked before about why do they even bother taking corner kicks, because it never bounces off their head in the direction of the goal. It's rare that it actually produces anything, right? And that's why, because it's very difficult to get yourself in the exact right spot where you need to be. It takes a lot of training and a lot of practice and luck sometimes to be in the right spot at the right time to capitalize.
In the context of my comments on that, I'm trying to build a case for set pieces that would maybe go farther back and maybe would involve some player in motion or something.
Right. Not in swinging toward the box to try and get a header, but some other kind of play. Right. And they do that, but you're right. Not a lot, that they very often rely on the chaos in the box trying to get it in. But so those challenges apply to the keeper also. You need to time it exactly right so that you get into the spot where the ball is going to be at the right time, that you're blocking the players around you so they don't head it before you can catch it, right? And the downside is, what if you miss? If you miss, you are way in front of the goal. You're way off the line. You're in front of the goal. The goal is therefore wide open. So once it lands on the ground in front of most likely the opposition's feet, they have a clear shot to just get it in. So you need to be confident that you're going to get it. And I haven't seen him miss one. I imagine it must happen sometimes, and it's probably really bad when it does. But most of the time he doesn't. He is good at that. That is a skill of his. So.
All right. Very interesting.
So, if you were to pick a player of the week, as we usually do, we usually try to, when there's multiple matches in a week, we'll say player of the week. And overall, between the two matches, who would you pick as your player of the week?
Well, I don't know. It's hard. I mean, to watch two games and not the Arsenal score one goal between them.
Well, the one very late goal at the end of the West Ham match by Odegaard. Yeah.
And how many saves did Raya make?
I didn't see the count.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's hard for me. Saka is normally my favorite player, and it's been good to see him back and playing. And maybe I'll I'll give it to him. And it's hard because
by default,
the best players weren't playing that many minutes in the
right
in the first game in the West Ham match, right?
He played about half an hour or so in the West Ham match, yeah.
So out of loyalty to soccer, he gets my vote.
So I didn't really notice anyone. I would give Ben White the opposite of player of the match for the West Ham match. But other than that, no one really caught my attention as deserving a shout out for the West Ham match. Who I did notice making a lot of very useful contributions during the Newcastle match was Saliba. He saved our skin a whole bunch of times. Lots of really good, proactive defensive plays. There are a lot of situations that could have been really dangerous if Saliba weren't on top of them. So Saliba gets my vote. So.
Okay.
All right. So, any closing thoughts before we sign off?
All right. Well, I was also going to give. I also had in my notes. I was going to give a shout out to Keith for his reference to the battle flags last week. You know, Keith being a PhD professor in Civil War studies. I appreciate his background and his expertise and his vast knowledge of an area that's very, very near and dear to my heart. Just an interest, a hobby of mine.
Sure.
Just keeping up on it. So I wanted to give him that shout out.
All right. Well, sure, he appreciates that. So if we're talking about next week, what's coming up is this Wednesday, we face the reverse fixture against Sevilla at home in the Champions League, which will be on Paramount Plus. Then Saturday is going to be our last match before the November international break. We're going to be playing against Burnley at home. That one will be on Peacock. We're going to have the November international break, which will resume when Arsenal returns on November 25th at Brentford. So a little while off, and we'll have updates for you at Gooner U on our international World Cup qualification matches, so stay tuned for that and more. Thanks for joining us at Gooner U. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and some other places, and we appreciate you subscribing to our show and sharing it with friends. If you're watching on YouTube, and we certainly recommend you do, please like and subscribe. To support the show even more, you can become a Gooner U superfan for ad-free episodes and bootleg recordings available the night we record. It's only $1 a month, and there's a link in the show notes to join. Thanks again to our sponsor, Zencastr. You can find them with a special link in the description. You can also follow our show on Twitter at Gooner U Show for updates and to ask questions. Please ask questions. We'd love to answer more questions on each show. Again, my name is Dove, and you can find me on Twitter at Dove Frankel. With me this week is my dad, Israel, and you can find him at home studying the Torah. Bye.
Go you Gooners.